Hey guys, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast and to another Uncork conversation. And today, my guest again is my friend and your historian. Yeah, that's right, your historian now, Craig Minchin of historyunfurled.com. Craig, thanks for joining me on the show again, my friend.
Always good, brother. It's always good to see you.
It's always good to see you. And this is the second time we've seen each other this week, isn't it?
It's like it's almost like a Windsor or overdose, to be honest with you.
I
Because
know, I know,
some
twice in a
people can
week.
only take in small doses, and I know you're not going to be offended if I say you may be in that category.
I'm in that category. I know, too much of a good thing will make you sick. That's what they say.
That's right. It's good to see you.
Speaking of too much of a good thing, what are we drinking tonight? By the way, what are you gonna drink?
Well, tonight I am drinking. See this? This is Bull Run. Nice Tennessee whiskey. This is from the bourbon club that I'm a part of, and I get a new bottle every couple months.
Oh, the Snooty Club. I like it. The
And you?
Snooty Club. Well, mine isn't from the Snooty Club, but I got it from a snooty friend. You bought it for me.
I did indeed.
It's called, it's called
Touche.
Natter. It's called Natterjack, and I've opened it before on the podcast with you, and I actually just keep it for special occasions. So you're like a special occasion, Craig.
Well, cheers to that, my friend.
Cheers to you. Here you go. Cheers to you, sir.
All right, buddy.
Mm.
Mm.
Oh, that's an Irish whiskey. It's got a little bit of pepper on it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I love the Irish. I love the way it goes. All right, Craig, I got a riddle for you to start. Are you ready?
let's hear it.
Okay, here we go. Craig, who said this? I said I could and I would and I did.
Well, that is the one and only Elizabeth Jane Cochrane, who you've probably never heard of. In
Nope.
fact, a lot of people, even if they have heard of her, probably don't know her by that name. That was her birth name, but we know her best by her pen name, her professional name, which is Nellie Bly. And
Nellie Bly.
she was born in 1864, died in 1922, and a really, really interesting character. And that
Okay.
quote sums her up really, really well.
Yeah, I said I could and I would and I did. Okay, so this is what we're going to explore tonight, people. It's a little bit different. It's not a classical historic leader, so this is going to be a little different conversation, but this will show a different side of Mr. Craig Minchin and his historical quests. So here's the question. Why should we want to discover her life and legacy in 2022 and how can we be inspired by her? Tell us her story, tell us a little bit about her history and
Okay.
explain some things from your research about her that have struck you, and we'll see if they strike a chord with me and my listeners.
Yeah, yeah. So it's easy to get really caught up with these high profile figures that you and I've talked about, and we continue to talk about whether we're on the air or not. I'm finding I'm loving discovering these personalities that are off the beaten path a little less known. So she didn't lead a nation, she didn't lead a massive social movement, she influenced, but she was born 1864, had a little bit of tragedy in her life. Her father was very, very wealthy. So father's very, very wealthy, but father died when she was 6 years old.
Hmm.
And her mother remarried, and don't know how long that marriage lasted, but it was a brutal, brutal marriage. She married a highly abusive individual, and at one point in time, they got divorced. And so young Elizabeth Cochrane kind of put, in her teenage years, she put her own education on hold, really just to do things that, well, to make ends meet, to help support her mother run. I think she was running a boarding house for workers, day workers, and but she didn't stay there for very long because one day she was living in Pittsburgh area, and one day she read an article in the Pittsburgh Dispatch. Young Elizabeth Cochrane, who we know as Nellie Bly. And the article it was almost like one of these, there's a technical word for it, but like one of these Dear Abby articles, like where someone writes in and a columnist responds and gives them advice. And the person that wrote in was writing, I think he called himself Anxious Father. And the subject of his letter to this paper was, I have no idea what to do with my 5 unmarried daughters. And because at the time that was it was not normal as far as not a social norm.
Right.
Well, the columnist that replied to that letter was a charming gentleman by the name of Erasmus Wilson, and his views on women were, I wouldn't say just less than flattering for today's standards. They were less than flattering for like 100 years ago standards. And so his response to what do you do with daughters? And I think his response was titled "What Girls Are Good For." And as you can imagine, based on my really brief description, it was not a very flattering response there. Well, young Elizabeth Cochrane, amongst many other readers, read that column, and to quote the newspaper, they got a mountain of letters in response to that response. So it just shows you that there was a real positive tide turning when it comes to women's right and how society viewed women in the US and in Canada. Well, she took pen to paper, this person who had dropped out of college, because she had to due to financial circumstances, and wrote a letter to the editor. And it was so well written, so persuasive. They didn't publish it, but the editor, I guess at the next release of the newspaper, said, "Whoever you are," I think she signed it the Lonely Orphan or something like that. "Whoever you are, please come to our offices. I'd like to speak with you." And so the day that she saw that, she went into the offices, and at 20 years old, she got her first journalist job as a result of that letter that she wrote. And that's really the beginning of an incredibly adventurous career in journalism and influencing.
Wow. Well, so obviously we're going to tuck into what that career looked like, but what an amazing story to think that, she's just expressing herself, her passion, her opinion, but clearly does it in a way that's just catalyzing and captivating to that editor.
Yeah.
And then she finds herself, I don't know, like I suppose somehow she walks through the doorway to her destiny in a way that
Yeah.
she never expected, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was, I mean, I don't know how many letters, but the quote unquote, there was a mountain of letters in response, and they read them all, and hers jumped out of all of them. And that just shows how talented she was and how persuasive her arguments were. And how she persuaded, and again, I want to say this over and over again. She was 20 years old when she wrote this, and so persuasive. And how she was persuasive was using something I would call, well, empathy, powerful empathy. So she made almost moral arguments as opposed to legal rhetoric to wit. But yeah, she just kind of walked in the door and walked into what would become her destiny.
That's interesting. So she gets this job. She now becomes a journalist in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
I imagine she's not writing for the social page or the recipe section, and she's probably not the new Dear Abby, but maybe she is. I don't know. What does she get? What
she
do they
was.
get her doing?
Yeah, yeah. So she actually did, and of course she would have no problem. Like she's got a job writing. Like that's this fantastic. So yeah, they had her writing stuff like home and garden, like high society stuff, fashion, But at the same time, and whether she was persuasive or whether they saw like she's got a real set of skills here that are really we're underutilizing, she started writing on things like poverty in Pittsburgh. That's where she was from. That's where Pittsburgh, the newspaper was based. Um, she actually went to Mexico and wrote on corruption in Mexico and got was so was so impactful on her articles in that country that they chased her out of the country as a 20-year-old. So she went from writing these, I guess we would call them puff pieces now, to more serious things, and eventually she left that paper, went to the big city to get a big city job, so to speak, and I think that's where her life really became even more interesting than what we've talked about already.
Interesting. So I mean, so she has. When does she become, or how does she become Nellie Bly? Like, is this a
Sure.
pseudonym that she gives herself? Like,
Yeah.
how do we get to know her as this, but we don't know her by her birth name?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the initial editor who hired her for that first job, this was very common to give like pseudonyms or pen names, but especially for women writers, and there weren't a lot at the time that were employed, but it was very very common. So the name Nellie Bly is actually it's based on a fictional character from a piece of very popular sheet music. Think of like it was written by like the Bob Dylan of the day, if that's a good context for people south of the border. And he wrote the song about this fictional woman whose name was Nellie Bly, who happened to be a Black American woman. And so the author, I would assume, thought it was very clever. He's like, yeah, so we're gonna call you Nellie Bly. And the spelling's a little different, but yeah, it was a name that he gave her, and she fully embraced it to the point that's how we know her to this day.
That's crazy. She moves into this job. She starts to have success. And again, if you're listening in, what I would encourage you to do is find yourself in Nellie's story. That's the interesting thing as we chart the journey of other people. We can find ourselves within their story, and sometimes that's helpful to reframe or see our stories or to see where they can go or what's happening. But see how your life fits into her story. Obviously, it's not going to be the same, but it might be an interesting sort of way of approaching the conversation. So she goes. She's now in Pittsburgh, and now she's going in. She's going into a new world. Where does it take her next?
Yeah, so she takes a job with a major New York paper. So like anyone, the big lights of New York City drew her more opportunity, and sure enough, she was hired on there as a writer. They knew her work a little bit, and they hired her on there. And same thing, probably small little jobs, but at age 23. And again, I keep repeating the ages, Tim, because what she was doing. I mean, I know what I was doing at 23, and it wasn't this.
Yep.
Um, Her editor at the newspaper there um, offered her an assignment, and this was really the first of its kind. This is where her leadership comes in particular when it comes to modern day journalism. And the assignment was an undercover assignment, and it was to go infiltrate a very hard to get into place, an insane asylum. So he approached her and said,
Whoa, hold on, full stop, full stop. Okay, so the editor, who's presumably a male,
"Yep,
decides that Nellie, the new Nellie Bly, should at 23
yeah,
should what have herself committed?
yes,
Oh my gosh!
voluntarily have herself committed." Yes, yeah,
Oh my!
yeah. So she jumped in. She latched onto it. Yeah, she latched onto it. So there must have been some twinkle in her eye.
Oh,
Um,
that's
and this is a trend that you're going to see through her life.
that.
Uh,
Oh,
a sense
that's
of just
great.
it's almost it's almost her her courage is almost Churchillian,
Yeah.
as far as his early years. Like just it's almost like yeah, I'm like just kind of putting herself in harm's way. And this was probably the part of her story I most latched onto. There's other things she did that's really cool, but yeah, she voluntarily had herself committed to the Blackwell what's lunatic asylum,
Oh my
and
gosh. Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
as a
Hold
23
on.
year old.
Before we go on, listen, if you're listening in, do me a favor. The next time your boss asks you to do something and you think it's ridiculous, just remember this. Just
Yeah.
remember this story. Because I don't think your boss has ever said, "Hey, I got a job for you. Check yourself into an insane asylum." Holy moly! And she's 23 years so of age. So this is around the turn of the century or so.
We're getting yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Okay. So does she do it? She's like, yeah, I'll do that.
She does.
Oh
She
my
she's
gosh.
and she details. Well, she gives incredible details on how she went about doing it. And we could almost get lost in that story, but you could almost picture her smiling as she's writing about it because to her own words, she said, I didn't know what an insane person looked like, so I didn't know how they behaved. And so, she would mess up her hair and, it's really ridiculous. But, she said, like, her eyes would glass over and she'd look at herself in the mirror like, do I look insane enough? Drool from her mouth, like, and so she actually successfully just kind of put on such an act that she got in, and it was actually one judge, and she was met with a mixture of just kind of apathy and kindness. This judge, who she wrote very fondly of, said he was so kind he didn't want to. He's like, I'm not buying that you're insane. Like I'm not buying your story. But I guess she was just so convincing that she persuaded. And yeah, sure enough, she was admitted to this asylum on Blackwell Island, which is current day Roosevelt Island. It's in the East River in New York City. So yeah, you had to take a boat to get to this island. It's like the worst kind of asylum from any horror movie. Um, you know, in Batman, there's like Arkham Asylum, Arkham Asylum. Like it's just picture that, and that's where she voluntarily got herself admitted to.
Oh my gosh. So she goes in there. She's like, so does anybody know that she's she's a reporter and that she's not insane and she's just coming in because she's trying to write some kind of expose, or does nobody know, like, how does this all how does this work?
So her editor obviously knew, and
Right.
several other people, part of the legal team at the at the newspaper. So there's a very, very small circle that knew. They changed her name from Nellie Bly to Nellie Brown, like made up a story. She spoke Spanish, so she could pretend she was from I think Cuba, like But no one knew outside of the very small circle of people. And one of her comments that she made was, "Yeah, I figured I could find a way to get myself in, but I had no idea how I was going to get out at the end of it."
Oh my
And
gosh.
so she went in, immersed herself to how to really the whole atmosphere and the environment of the mental health institution at that time.
Oh my gosh. Now, was there
So
anything
they
in
had
her
no idea.
that's great. Was there anything in her past that, like, from your research, that caused her to be drawn to this particular assignment, or was it just her natural quest to discover and tell truth? And I guess before we ever was ever a term, speak truth to power, because this term is new to us. Or was
Yeah.
there something in her experience that shaped this sense for her? Do you have any idea about that?
So I would say right from the get go, she was really drawn to, I guess we would call social issues. Like she was really drawn to really issues where people were suffering as a result of the structure of society or the legal system. She was always drawn to that,
Hmm.
hence from her early days. I think one of her first part of her rebuttal when she was 20 years old to that really toxic column. I think part of her rebuttal was talking about the impact of divorce on women at the time, and it was catastrophic. So she always had this heart for really important social issues, and I think there was rumors around this asylum. So it's not that mental health was necessarily her big cause. It was just like I'm interested in any kind of cause that there could be some good come out of it. And there was rumors out of this asylum in particular about how patients were treated. A lot of resistance to letting people in to see.
Wow.
And there was also rumors around the overall state of how we treated the mentally ill at the time. So I think that was her catalyst, just like, okay, this is exciting. I really think she thought this was exciting. I really think that she thought, well, this is cool. You know,
Wow.
let's just get in there, and if I can do some good while I'm there, and as a result, I think that was a real driving force.
Wow. So okay, so she gets herself admitted. Now she's in the asylum with no clear plan to get out, apparently, which that just seems totally ridiculous to me. Um, so
Yeah.
what happens in this time period, and how do we know? Like, how do we know about it? Like, what record did she leave of
Sure.
this experience that we could touch on today?
Sure. So the good news is she did get out eventually, and but what she witnessed there, Tim, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff down because she was incredibly detailed about what she saw. So initially, she if she saw kindness, she would kind of call it out. She said, "Yeah, some of the doctors were really really kind there. Some were apathetic, and some were downright cruel. But there's no one who was called out more than the nursing staff. There was no one who was more highlighted for cruelty than the nursing staff there. Um, so Blackwell Island lunatic asylum was, I think, housed. I think they estimate around 1,600 patients,
Wow.
and some like Nellie Bly didn't belong there. It was very clear. She was very clear there. She said, "Yeah, there was some women there that really clearly didn't belong there because they were not. They were admitted, on someone else's behalf. Someone else admitted them."
Hmm.
But yeah, what she did is just a gradual, and she details in her book, which I've read, just a real gradual increase in just I'd say apathy and cruelty, and as I was watching this, or sorry, as I was reading about her accounts, it's always gut wrenching to hear these things, what humans can do to one another. I was
Yeah.
thought, okay, yeah, but you know what? Mental health and how we treat it was an emerging science. There was a lot we didn't know. I don't even know if Freud's teachings were out there. I don't know the evolution of thought when it comes to psychology or psychiatry. But some of the stuff that they did would just be cruel, even considered by previous standards. And
Wow.
so she references the cold very often. So it was in fall where she went in there. Cold, uh, poor food, poor clothing, like threadbare clothing, uh, everyone bathing in the same tepid cold water, um, sitting upright in hours in a room with chairs with no backs and just not allowed to speak a word. No access to news from the outside world. There was the pulling of hair. There was sexual manipulation, emotional manipulation, teasing, choking, smothering, force feeding, what we would now call waterboarding,
Oh my gosh.
beatings, exploitation of them as almost like slave labor, and over medication. And that's all, everything. And she detailed that very graphically and very, very explicitly. It's hard to read.
Wow, that's crazy. So obviously, when you say hard to read, so what did she write a book? So did she eventually put this into a book, or was this as a series of news reports that you're referencing?
So it was both. So initially, of course, because it's a newspaper that employed her, they wanted her to go in there and then write for the paper. And so after 10 days there, she was rescued by one of the company's lawyers. And she said by that point in time, I was done. Like I was ready. Like, because I was a fully sane person, but I could feel myself. If I put words in her own mouth, I could feel myself kind of getting pulled towards insanity. And so she was rescued. Obviously, she published what she saw in the newspaper. It went viral. In
Right.
in terms that we use today, it went viral, not just across the state, but it went viral nationally. And all of those dispatches, all of those columns were compiled in a book that she called 10 Days in a Madhouse. And I know madhouse, it's a dated term, but
Yeah.
that's a term they would use. 10 Days in a Madhouse, and she just, all the details are there to this day. And it's a compelling read. If it wasn't such a horrible subject, I'd say it's a real page turner. And
Right.
it's great to see how talented she was and how she used those talents.
Wow, it's interesting. And I mean, I'm thinking about this. I mean, and as you guys listen in, I mean, what I'm thinking of as we talk, and just to be really transparent with our listeners, I didn't know anything about Nellie Bly, and when Craig suggested we talk about her, I decided I wasn't going to do any research in advance at all before the podcast, just so I could discover her as you are today, if you're listening, and then I would decide. Did I want to keep discovering her? Because I think that's part of the great thing in the
Mm,
podcast. You bring this person to us, you bring it to me, to bring her to me, you bring her to my listeners, and we discover a portion of her journey and story, and then we can decide, do we want to move into it further? And it's powerful. And what I hear in her story is that she's clearly got this idea of being a voice for the voiceless. She's giving a voice to people who can't vocalize their trauma or their experience, and that's something that really strikes a chord in me personally. And again, if you're listening, just think about it in your world, and it may not be obviously the same kind of world that she went into, but how do we vocalize for others what they can't? Sometimes we're in a place where we have a stage or a platform. She had a stage and a platform. Some of us have a stage and a platform that we can bring vocalization to things, issues, problems. We can do it in our social circles. We could do it in media. We could do it in other things. We could do it in social media because we all have access to that. But maybe part
mhm.
of this is a challenge. What does it mean to be a voice for the voiceless? What does it mean to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves and defend the people who cannot defend themselves, like the people in this insane asylum, which just really that's a gut wrenching story for sure. So she's 23. She has this experience. My gosh,
Yeah.
where do you go from there? Like, so is this the embryonic stage of, like, this is investigative journalism, I suppose. This is what it is,
This
right? Is
is,
this
yes.
the embryonic
Yeah.
days of this kind of thing?
Yeah, so there was no such thing as an investigative journalist before Nellie Bly. So
Huh.
she's the true pioneer. I mean, you had journalists that would that's the nature I think of journalism, to try and find good stories and risky and entertaining stories that kind of please the ears and the eyes. But she's the first one, as far as I know, and she's considered definitely the first one to really pioneer investigative journalism. And
Wow.
just one thing I wanted to touch on, just to kind of close off this chapter
Yeah.
of her life, because believe me, there's more. It does. I mean, I think this alone would be worthy of just we could stop here and derive some really cool things from her life at this age. But after her articles were published and it went viral, there was a grand jury that wanted to interview her in the state and wanted to find out a little bit more. And so
Wow.
she spoke very fondly of them. She said, "Yeah, these were all." She used the term gentlemen, and I think that's code. These were intelligent, conscientious. These were good leaders. And so the grand jury said, "Well, we're going to go and we're going to see this with our own eyes, and we'd like you to come with us back to the
Wow.
asylum." And she, of course, agreed. Well, I guess someone had tipped off the asylum. So by the time they had got there, all those patients that she had written about, she had their names. Like I said, she was very detailed. They had all been shuffled off. They'd either been released or shuffled off to another asylum. That moldy, rotten food that was a staple was replaced with fresh fruit. It was a con job. But I think the best part of that, so as they're all doing their walkthrough, I think the best part of that is her writing was so compelling and her presence was so compelling, and she had the right audience, and that this grand jury were intelligent people. Even though their eyes told them that this was a perfectly nice place,
Interesting.
um, their hearts told them otherwise. And as a result, there was an immediate influx of cash into the Mental Health Institute in New York State, $1 million,
Wow.
which again we're going back to 1900s, and there's reforms around intake, around staffing, around care, around the science, around mental health, and that didn't
Wow.
just stay in New York State. That actually expanded across the United States of America. Not bad for a 23-year-old, I'd say.
Wow. So not only did she speak up, but she was heard, and then the change came. I mean, that's catalytic, and again, that's a great inspiration to all of us for sure to understand what place we have and what journey we can have along the way. So okay, so now what what's next for her? So she's 23. This happened. All this stuff happens. And by the way, I hate to sound ignorant, but I am ignorant in this case. I'm assuming that because the editor, her first editor, gave her this name Nellie Bly, which was from this African American sort of tradition. I'm assuming she is African American, but I could be assuming wrong right now. So, was she African American?
No, she's white. No,
Oh
she's
my
white.
gosh, interesting. So that's interesting
Yeah,
because it wasn't her name was derived from that. And that's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and I can't quite get my head around that, but I thought that's odd. Odd
Yeah,
meaning unusual for the editor to
yeah,
pick that name, considering what was going on. I mean, they were just on the heels of the U.S. Civil War. You got to remember that. I
yeah,
mean, that was
yeah.
and they were hardly over their civil rights issues and the separations between the races. That tells me something very interesting, and I can't quite put my finger on it, about that
Yeah,
editor, why he would pick
interesting.
that
That
character, a fictional character,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
Nellie.
but
Yeah,
that's interesting because again, I'm just expressing my own ignorance. I just made an assumption based on the fact that that's where that name came out of that sort of that tradition. That
right.
obviously I'm thinking. So that's an interesting thing. There's something going on there, which is that's a very interesting sub part of the story. I'm gonna have to do some more reading. Hey, if you're listening in, you
Mhm.
might want to do some more reading and discover this lady because that's an interesting journey. Okay, so let's get back on track.
All right.
23, this happens. What's the next thing that you read about that really struck you when you read about Nellie? And by the way, are you going to write some? You going to write some stuff and put it on History Unfurled?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why, to be honest with you, I picked her. For everyone who doesn't know, Tim and I, like, Tim doesn't tell me he wants to research a certain person. We talk about it. It's collaborative. Because I found her story so fascinating that, yeah, I'm hoping to put some stuff. I'm planning on putting some stuff on
Awesome. That's
historyunfurled.com,
great. So we'll
around
look for it there,
around
but
her
I'm going
story.
to find this book as well. Okay. So next big thing that touches you. How old is she? Is she 30 or 40 now?
Oh no, she's a whopping 25 years old when she
Oh
goes to
my.
her next big thing. And
Okay.
yeah, 25 years old. And so she, still working for the same paper, she proposed something. So by now she's a journalistic celebrity. I mean, she
Yeah.
really is quite well known in Asia, not just for what she's done, but how she writes. Like she's going her career is going upwards. She proposes something. There was a very famous Jules Verne novel. So those who don't know Jules Verne, you probably know a couple of his books. He was a French novelist, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Journey to the Center of the Earth. When I was a kid, these were really, really big books.
Yeah.
But he'd also written a book called Around the World in 80 Days, where a fictional character named Phileas Fogg took a wager to see if he could travel around the world in 80 days. Um, so Nellie Bly, being a real reader and obviously quite adventurous, proposed to a newspaper and says, "I know it's a fictional piece of work of fiction, but I wonder if it's possible to travel around the world in 80 days." And so she makes that as a formal proposal. How about you send me to travel around the world in 80 days? And just to be really clear, this is before air travel. This is a long time before air travel. This is using technology that had been used for centuries and centuries and centuries. I mean, Tim, she rode a donkey for goodness sake. That's part of her journey around the world in 80 days. So at age 25, she embarked on a novel to see if she can beat this fictional story written by the one, probably the most well-known novelist in the world at the time, Jules Verne, and to see like, hey, I wonder if we can even do it. And yeah, so she left New York Harbor, and she went on this journey just by herself. And when I say by herself, there's other passengers around, but this is also another unusual thing: unescorted, no male escort with her. It was just her, this 25-year-old woman, and she had to do some convincing with her editor, and I think probably rightfully so. It's like, this is a little risky, like we live in a modern world, and I don't know how I'd feel about my 25-year-old daughter, going around, even in the modern world. I think the irony is, probably due to geopolitics, it was probably a lot safer back then than it is right now, to be
Right.
really, really frank. But yeah, that's her next big adventure, around the world in 80 days. Go figure,
O-
at 25.
Okay, so she sets out. I mean, she rode a donkey, but I'm assuming she didn't ride a donkey. She didn't ride a donkey from New York City, or was it an aquatic donkey? Did she? Well, other than right, you said she rode a donkey. Come on now, she had to write more. This is now a fictional story. Come on,
This is
she had to
now
ride more
fictional.
than she had to ride more than a donkey.
Yeah, I wrote out everything she wrote: steamship, train, rickshaw, horse and carriage, donkey, what we would call a tuk-tuk, a sampan. Like every mode of travel that was available at the time. I think she took it.
That's crazy. So okay, so she sets out, and I mean, my assumption is she does it, but does she do it?
She does it. Not only does she do it, the novel was, around the world in 80 days. She
Yep.
did it in 72 days, 6 hours, 11 minutes, and 14 seconds. So it was timed meticulously. It was a
Oh,
publicity stunt for the newspaper, and she was sending dispatches as she was going. So these were like live articles that she was sending back to New York, and they were published. Yeah, but yeah, she did it. Yeah.
that is craziness. Okay, guys, so listen, if you're listening in and you don't know who this lady is, Nellie Bly, you need to look her up. You need to find these books. You need to, I'm sure she's in Wikipedia. She's somewhere. She's out
Oh
there.
yeah, yeah,
Do some Googling and discover her life because it sounds passionately amazing. And first of all, let's be inspired by her chutzpah. I mean, she's got some
yeah,
chutzpah for sure. Let's be inspired by that. What I love about this is that these are totally two different things. On one
yeah.
level, she uses her chutzpah to go into an insane asylum to write for the benefit of others. On another level, this seems very self aggrandizing, almost a little bit selfish, not selfless. And what an interesting dichotomy, by the way, which we all have. I mean, we all have this interesting
Mhm.
dichotomy, but it's like this is a circus trip. This sounds like a circus trip here.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
it's a really interesting sort of juxtaposition to her last thing, but clearly she's drawn to adventure, to challenge, to all these things, and she's just inspiring women in a time where women had zero place. I mean, I don't even think. I mean, I don't know my history that well, but they surely couldn't vote yet.
No, they couldn't vote yet. No, they couldn't vote yet. So that was the first big hurdle for women, certainly in the Western world, to get the vote. Um, and then, of course, then there's the social
Hmm.
dynamics that have to catch up with the law, which we know takes decades and probably longer to catch up, where there's true equity. But yeah, no, she didn't have the vote at the time. So yeah, there's a real inspiration there. And you know, I think she knew what she was doing as far as she knew who she was inspiring. But I think similar to, Tim, I got to harken back to Martin Luther King Jr. Similar to him, she knew her audience was actually broader than just women. It
Right.
was high society. It was
Hmm.
politicians. It was a very, very broad audience. And I just think that is say such a cool thing. I think that's actually absolutely inspiring. Her
No,
ability
that
to
is for
connect with
sure.
so many people.
So okay, so you start touching her life, and now you find these experiences, and this is what I love about your journey, Craig. When you start barreling into somebody, you start touching some experiences historically and pushing into it and getting inspired by it and everything. So as you take all that and synthesize it, so when you look
Mm.
at her character qualities and the things you saw, because this is what I love about you as a person. You read these stories, but then you look inside them. You I don't know, you sort of crystal ball them, and you go around them in different angles and you get a sense of what it means. So when you look at the character qualities that you see in her from the things you read, what did you see as character qualities and how did they inspire you and how could they maybe inspire us?
Um, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I think that the you know the first thing that jumped out at me as far as character qualities, and it's something I've never seen before, and I don't know why, because it's as plain as day. She used both curiosity and courage to create change. And
Hmm.
I didn't throw C's in there just because it sounds cool, but what I'm realizing is that curiosity
Hmm.
and courage are actually married together. And
Interesting.
I'd never seen that before. Never. She was curious what life was like in an asylum. And that took a heck of a lot of courage to go and do that. And there is another character quality that she displayed there was risky compassion.
Interesting.
While she was there, she didn't keep her head down. And she stood up for inmates that were being brutalized, and she tried to lobby with them for with some of the doctors. And remember, she doesn't have any protection here. Like she is as vulnerable to waterboarding and beating and being doped up as anyone else there, and yet she's still lobbying on behalf of others. So it's that whole thing about curiosity to the world and courage really being married together. And I try to figure that out in my own life, as someone who, by her standards, I've lived a very conservative, safe life.
Hmm.
Maybe absent of courage at times, but what an inspiration to use that curiosity and a healthy dose of courage to create something positive change and just really just not only enhance my life, maybe just maybe enhance a circle of people around me.
That's interesting. And I just want to park on that for a second. So for those of you who, when you hear this podcast, by the way, and it's sort of an interesting dovetail, and I just want to point this out. So Craig wouldn't know this, and listeners, you wouldn't know this. You will by the time this airs. But I just recently recorded a podcast with a gentleman that is going to go live in a couple of days from now. We're recording this on the 31st of, I think it's March. On the 5th of April, I have a podcast going live with a man by name of Bo Anderson, and we talk about curiosity and caring in that one.
Hmm.
And Craig would know this, and of course, by the time you listen to this podcast, you'll have that one to listen to as well. But Bo and I tuck into this idea of curiosity and caring, compassionate curiosity, this idea of caring and
Wow.
curiosity coming together. It's interesting. You're talking about something else of curiosity and courage, and then this what was the term you used? Courageous. What was that?
Risky compassion, maybe.
Risky compassion. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. So listen, if you haven't listened to that episode with Bo, which is very different, it's about his life as an engineer in a traditional type of industry in the U.S. If you haven't listened to that, listen to that. But this is a powerful connection for me right now. So we've got curiosity being the catalyst, but when married with either caring or married with compassion or married with courage, this curiosity takes on this different life form. And
Mm,
so, again, if you're listening, and I'm just having this sort of epiphany in the moment, to be very frank,
mm,
use your curiosity and allow it to add something to it to direct it. Your curiosity can be directed by compassion. It can be directed by your courage, but the raw
mm,
energy of curiosity can be channeled in so many different ways. Be curious.
mm,
Seek things, push into things, experiment, but experiment with a sense of courageousness. Experiment with a sense of compassion. Uh, can, experiment for yourself, but experiment for others. And that's a really interesting connective tissue, Craig, as you talk about that tonight. And again, those of you who are listening to this, and this probably won't air for, maybe a month or so from the time typically by the time we put it into rotation. So really interesting. Okay, so curiosity, this power that she had. What else really struck you and inspired you, Craig?
I don't know if everyone reads her work and sees what I see here. She was also someone who was willing to let her flaws make their way to her writing. And I thought that was really, for someone who in many ways had the burden of a society on her shoulders, especially a segment of our society who was still trying to find their voice in a very male dominated world. You would think she would filter out some of those real complex imperfections. Like, so, you know, she talks about it before she was about to get on the boat to go around the world in 80 days. She talks about butterflies in her stomach. And she actually goes in detail to, I would think we would describe it almost as a panic attack. Like, she was describing physical things that they didn't really have names for at the time. She talks very openly about something funny, but seasickness. She got really, really sick, and we know all the gross stuff associated with seasickness. But she's like trying to be this really elegant, courageous crusader, but she's really willing to also let people kind of see that I'm a mere mortal. Like, I'm just in a way, it's like I'm just kind of innocent. Like, I'm doing my best. I'm making this up as I go. Is maybe what I'd say. Her
Interesting.
anxiety, her uncertainty. Um, and so I respect that. I respect when people are willing to let a little bit of themselves. I mean, she talks about how she would blush when she'd meet a handsome young man. She talks about things that are very human, and she used her I call it just almost strategic, empowered empathy.
Interesting.
In that ability, we talk about sympathy and empathy, like, caring for
Yeah.
people when they're struggling. But I think she used empathy in the purest sense, in that she was able to connect people with herself. She was
Yeah.
able to connect people with her ideas, values, principles, and she just found that real sweet spot of showing people who she really was. Like, yeah, I was scared when I got on that boat. Yeah, I got really, really sick. Yeah, I almost turned around because I met a young guy going through Europe, and he just made my heart go a twitter. And you'd think she'd just be more guarded, but she wasn't. And I just find that even takes a lot of courage and real comfort in your own skin. And
Yeah.
so, as someone who's still trying to discover what it means to be authentic in a world and at work and in
Yeah.
relationships, um, I find that really challenging and inspiring and inviting. It invites me,
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
to maybe let people, see behind the curtain.
Yeah, you know what? And again, if you're listening in, I think that's just a really interesting observation. I mean, so I think sometimes we think when we're influencing people that we need to influence them from a place of perceived perfection. And I just think that that's just so wrong. And I actually believe it's the frailty, the weakness of our humanity as it's expressed to others that actually makes people realize that although we do amazing things, that we're just like them, and that identification that people can enter into your experience. Because I think one of the things that leaders do, and again, she's not a leader in a traditional way, but she's clearly a leader. um, you know
Yeah,
I think one thing that leaders do is they have this a way of doing things in such a way that people leave, particularly leaders who want to empower others. They do things in such a way that when people leave, they go, oh my gosh, if they can do that, I can do that. Whereas
yeah,
some leaders, when you leave their presence, you're like, oh my gosh, I can never do that. So I think the expression of our humanity, of our weakness, of our frailties, of our insecurities actually helps that self identification with others. So again, if you're listening in, depending on who you're leading or working with, hey, just be yourself and express your vulnerabilities and weaknesses. It's so absolutely powerful and transformative. Also, what I find interesting, Craig, about what you're saying, so she's expressing things that, as a woman, again, there's this stereotypical sort of belief at that time for sure about the weakness and frailty of women. And so she's expressing stuff that could have easily been used against her to say, in some ways, look, it's just a frail woman who is blushing.
absolutely.
She's that's why at that time, of course, not today, the weaker sex, whatever that meant back then. Not true. And anyway, of course, But wow, she's still vulnerable enough to say, I'm going to express that because that's just part of who I am. I'm all this and a bag of chips. I'm everything.
Yeah.
I can go
Yeah.
into a sane asylum. I can go around the world in 72 days, 6 hours and 11 minutes, 14 seconds. I think you said. I got a
Something
good
like that.
memory.
Close enough.
I got
Yeah.
something like that. You got a good memory. But she can also express her frailty, and there's power in that. Excellent.
Yeah.
So okay, listen. At the end of the day, here's what I want to ask. As we finish up today, if you could put a pin in one thing in her life and say, okay, guys, everything else aside, just as you go out and touch this woman's life, and hopefully you do, what's the one thing that you would say, hey, just don't miss this about her?
I would say, and you know what? There's actually a quote that I think it left a really impression on me. It's actually her written words. Again, she wrote at 20 years old, in response to that horrible column. These were her words that she wrote at 20 years old. And I think I'm gonna read those if you don't mind, and then
No, awesome. Please do.
I'll respond because I think this is a
Yeah.
great way for me to end. Um, so these are her words, and she's addressing women in high society, but she's actually addressing everyone in high society. Like I said, she had a broad audience. So her words were this quote: "Here would be a good field for believers in women's rights. Let them forgo their lecturing and writing and go to work. More work and less talk." 20 years old, by the way. "Take some girls that have the ability, procure for them situations and opportunities, start them on their way, and by so doing, accomplish more than by years of talking." And I think that is just a call to action, and whatever action looks like. And so I have all these thoughts and these dreams and aspirations, whether it be in the realm of empathy, whether it be in the realm of my career, my hobbies, the things I want to legacy. We talk a lot. You and I talk a lot about legacy. I have all these things, but it really does require some action, and they can be baby steps. They can be, but as long as it's some kind of movement forward. And of course, I will always come back to her courageous curiosity and how she used it to change and create a really a better society for everyone.
Mm. Craig, thanks a lot. I mean, as you talk about that, I mean, clearly she's got this powerful resiliency. She overcomes challenges. She gets it figured out. She takes the things that she's talented at and she uses them for others. She uses them for herself, of course, but she uses them for others. There's so many things in this story. It dances so beautifully. And as you read that quote, I had to say, and that's the first time I've heard it, um, I had both a positive and a negative response. At one point, I thought, man, I think we need to still say that today to our young ladies,
Yeah,
to our girls,
yeah, yeah,
which means in some ways we haven't really come too far. Um, but but maybe we've come far, but not far enough, because we have to encourage we have to encourage women to be themselves and step in and step up. And even now, I mean, we have gender gaps in businesses and in groups. We have wage disparity
yeah,
still in our country in Canada amongst what a woman go get paid for in the same position often as a man. I mean, there's still this problem in our society. And man, I mean, she's living in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and we're now living in my lifespan's the 1960s into the 2020s now. You're obviously not quite as old as I am, but how true is it today, even what she said back then? And I would
yeah,
encourage you, whether it's a son or daughter or male or female, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. But let's encourage people to find their way, to do what is right, to use their gifts and talents for the benefit of others. Let's encourage people to go into that dark and scary place, whatever it might be. It might be an insane asylum, it might be something different. Go in that dark and scary place around you and be the voice for the voiceless. Find that place in your life. You can do it. Be challenged by an absolutely fictional book to do something cockamamie like try to go around the world. Do something adventurous. Do something different. We're just crawling out of COVID. Oh my God, please do something adventurous because the last 2.5 years have been a shit show. okay, of lockdown, lock up. I mean, we're Canadians. Oh my gosh, we've been locked down more than like I feel like I'm a prisoner, like I've gone to jail. We got to get out and do stuff. Get out and do stuff for yourself. Do something exciting. Go around the world in less than 80 days. Do something amazing as well, and be a voice for the voiceless. Let Nellie Bly's story inspire you. Go out and research about her, think about her, braille her story, touch it, and be inspired. Thanks for listening, and have an excellent, excellent day. Cheers.